You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks, and a very special episode as Fantha Tracks were invited to 2 roundtables where we were able to put questions to ILM's TJ Falls, Skywalker Sound's David Accord. But first off, let's hear from production designer Luke Hull and costume designer Michael Wilkinson on this very special episode of Making Tracks.
Hi, this is Pete Fletzer from Around the Galaxy. Luke, the Easter egg placement in Andor has arguably been the most subtle of all the live-action Disney Star Wars, but it's also had some of the deepest cuts. How do you work with the story group to make sure fans of the lore are served without excluding the casual fans?
I think it's more about just making sure that we don't start from a basis of it being fan service. So it's like, it's it's not the first thing I think about. I think the best way to answer that is like, there's a lot of us on the show, and we're a good mix of people who have worked on Star Wars, who are Star Wars fans, and people who have absolutely no context of Star Wars. And so within that, we're all filmmakers. So we're trying to make environments that feel correct in the context, that everything's there that should be, and that tells a story and gives us a very kind of character-based environment. And then within that, like, okay, so what can we put in from Star Wars that not reminds us we're there, but actually would be there in that environment, in a Star Wars galaxy, rather than try and slip things in for fun. So Luthen's Gallery is a very good example of something where every artifact in there, the whole collection needed to work together to tell a story of lost culture and interesting artifacts from across the galaxy, of which some things are there that we can recognize from previous movies or shows or whatever. So I think that's more the approach. It's like, never are we led by that. It's more about just things that would be, that enrich that environment on that level should be there. Does that make sense? Is that a good answer? I don't know.
Completely. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Luke. I'm Gustavo from Triad of the Force. And my question had to do with Coruscant and the designs that had to go into Coruscant. Because when we go into that planet, we see that there's 3 main areas that we're telling our stories in. It's Cyril's mom's apartment, the ISB, and then Mon Mothma's apartment. And I feel it's a really big contrast, this Coruscant that we see in Andor versus the Coruscant that we saw in Attack of the Clones, which was very bright, saturated colors, lots of neon. It was a very welcoming environment. And when we see like these 3 locales, it's quite the opposite to an extent. There's brutalist architecture, very minimal modernism, and then some Art Deco and Mon Mothma's apartment. So what was the process of design to like do an anti-Coruscant, so to speak, that then framed the themes of each character's story?
You've almost answered your own question there, but I think this is a good one for Michael to answer as well, because I think what he did with the costumes in Coruscant was phenomenal. But okay, so basically, I'm not a massive fan of how Coruscant looked in the prequels. So, and I think the thing with that is it's just environment background. So what I wanted to do, it's literally the hardest thing, and I could talk for hours about why it's hard to do. And if we're going to do it, we have to do it well. So, and you don't want every environment in Coruscant to be told via a CGI, led element. So, and equally, when you're composing those CGI shots, you don't want them to feel like they wouldn't exist in a real world. So the kind of core principle of Coruscant is its height, its verticality. It's 3 miles high, and its sort of dichotomy is made up of literally told, the sort of upper at the top and the middle in middle Coruscant, the lower kind of in lower Coruscant. We don't touch on lower Coruscant that much. So it's then it becomes character led, which is interesting. So, and then you want to look at cities like Tokyo and New York, and like what what is the language of a vertical city and what makes that interesting. That's kind of the approach. So it was never about trying to make Coruscant look like Coruscant or Ralph McQuarrie's Coruscant or anything like that. It should smell like that. It should have that nostalgia, but it should fit in Star Wars. It shouldn't feel futuristic or sci-fi, and yet I want to understand it as a real place that could exist. And equally, we don't necessarily need to always be away from it. We want to inhabit areas within it. So it's really complicated, but essentially the principles are materials. Like it should be monochromatic, it should be concrete, it should be steel, it should be glass, it should be things like this. It's hard, it's inhumane, there's a total lack of organic material there. And you just sort of make these decisions and you build it up and you realize what starts to work and what doesn't work. And then Edie's is a great one because I mean, the idea behind it is like, I reckon she bought that apartment 20 years ago. She had a view across Coruscant and then the whole city grew up around her and it got lost like she did. And it's got that kind of Baker-like cream versus, say, the clinical sterility of the ISB or Mon's sort of, it's kind of like Mon's place is almost like an embassy building that was given to her. So it's got values of her Chandrilian culture, and yet also it's got this sort of lack of comfort that brings with Coruscant. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I really do think you should ask Michael that question because I think we both talked a lot about that planet in particular.
I think from my point of view, we did what we do on all planets. Luke and I would talk really deep dived into the culture, and we wanted to build actual, real, authentic societies, and not just like random colors and textures for each planet. But we thought about, the culture, what materials and technologies would they have? How is it a stratified society? Is it a unified society? We thought Coruscant would be very diverse. There would be people from all over the galaxy there. It's the seat of government. There's a Senate there. There's all sorts of embassies. But we also go deep into the core of Coruscant. So we see the different societies. We see the people that might, service the buildings, the lower Coruscant. We go deeper and deeper until people are engaging in more nefarious activities. And so we wanted to represent that entire spectrum of culture. It's not like you just go to the rental house and you buy 6 of these things and you dye them different colors and that's your culture. We just wanted to think about every background player would have a backstory and a reason for being on screen.
Hi, I'm Chase, aka That Gay Jedi, and Michael, my question is for you. I remember hearing a story that you had about Amy Adams and her character in American Hustle, and sort of this stain that you came across and found in a vintage dress that ended up becoming sort of a perfect story moment for the script and for the story. So I was wondering if there are any happy accidents in your costuming process for Andor.
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's see. Happy accidents. I mean, I think it was actually a little bit. There weren't actually so many accidents on this set, were there, Luke? In the sense that everything was much more. There was this endless discussion and thinking about things. So I think it was. American Hustle was very of the moment and organic, and let's just give this a go. But when you're working in the Star Wars universe, everything really has to have a logic and a reason for being on camera. There's going to be a lot of scrutiny over every square inch of the frame, as you guys are very familiar with this concept. And so you want to make sure that things are there for a reason. So I would say there wasn't so much accents, but just lots of deep thinking.
Thank you.
Hi, I really love the prison arc. I think Narkina 5 is very different from what I think most people would imagine a prison to be. It's bright, it's clean, there's no bars, there's no real guard presence, yet it's still completely oppressive. So how did you design the prison and the costumes, the entire look to sell this idea that the inmates are being constantly monitored when in reality, nobody's listening? And what does the design of oppression look like to you?
That's a really good question. And the prison for me was always like a cross between an abattoir and a laboratory. And yet also is like a labor camp, essentially, that you can't escape from. It's like Alcatraz, but if Alcatraz was a lab. So I just find that more interesting. I mean, it would, right from the beginning when we talked about a prison and we looked at panopticons and things like that, and that logic of how we could make the organic material of the people be the thing that turns the machine. They're the disposable element, was what that came from. So I think it's just way more interesting to go with something more sterile and stark. It's more sinister, it's more creepy, it's more THX 1138, which was a good reference which we started with for the prison. So then say something grungy and obvious for a prison. I think, I don't know much you've seen, but as that builds, that story, it will make more sense as well. Again, it's I actually really love making white sets as well. I think they photograph beautifully. I think things pop more. I think they have a sinister nature, which I think was just, I don't know, it just felt more interesting for that part of the show. When you look at how we break down these blocks and, the earthiness of Ferrix against the sort of organicness of the highlands, which is like our version of the desert, and then this kind of trapped sterility of the prison. It started there and then it evolved and I know Michael is the same, really. I mean, like sorry, Michael, carry on.
I think for us, Luke and I sort of talked about, how do those who wield the power, like the Empire, how do they use environment and color to oppress and intimidate and disorientate? And I think this palette of white on white is like, there's nowhere to hide. It's quite horrific. You lose your sense of depth because all you can see is white on white. So it's you're disempowered by this soul destroying environment. So we spent lots of time also developing a fabric that felt very utilitarian, disposable. It feels like they just peel them off at the end of the day. They're treated like cattle, hosed down, sterilized, and then they're given a fresh one for the next day. So I kind of like all of these tiny little details that would eat away at you psychologically as a prisoner. They were sort of brought into the details of the costume.
Hello, Luke and Michael. This is Sarah and Richard from Skywalking Through Neverland.
Andor's got such a great visual style. Very, very unique. It's Star Wars without being Star Wars. How close did you want to get to what we've seen already in Star Wars? And what motifs did you know you wanted to work in when creating the world of Andor?
I don't think we ever started that way around. I think when I first met Tony, it was almost like, okay, we're going to make a Star Wars show, but it's not going to be like any Star Wars show that you've watched, kind of thing. So, which is exciting anyway. It's just challenging. It's really hard when you start realizing that means going into people's apartments and checking out their bathrooms and going to work with them. And so what do we want to keep? I think it was more like keeping the tangibility of the original 3 movies, and then looking at Rogue One, the sort of grittiness of that, finding a sense of modernity that could compete with other shows, and also make work with the drama and the writing of what Tony puts together and the character-led sort of drama, but maintaining the sense of nostalgia that I think Star Wars holds so well, without wanting it to become like, and I'm not saying other shows do this at all, but that was partly a fear. It's very easy to slip into selecting things as if from a catalog of Star Wars in order for it to just feel Star Wars. I don't think any of us ever wanted to do that. I certainly know Michael and I didn't want to do that. It was about enhancing what was there and then fleshing it out to make it feel like you really could walk and live in this universe with these people, and hopefully forget about it at times, forget that maybe you're watching Star Wars. And then be reminded now and again. That was kind of the goal anyway.
And Michael, for the costumes, if you could weigh in, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I think we knew as soon as we read the scripts that we would have to take a new approach to our creating the visuals for this project. All of Tony's characters are so detailed and complex, messed up. They couldn't afford to be just like 2-dimensional costuming. Every sort of detail and layer had to be thought about. The choices would be practical, character driven, and not ornamental or added on. So, which really worked for me, because that's the way that I love to work as well. But there was certainly, what incredible established costume language there is for Star Wars already. 40 years of incredible design of some of the most talented costume designers on the planet, sort of contributing their vision to the what a Star Wars world looks like. So it was, amazing to have an opportunity to have my own take on that world. And so we wanted to definitely, use the presence of things like the established uniforms and the armor to ground us really firmly into the Star Wars world. They would do a lot of work for us to sort of show the audience that, yes, this is a world that they knew. But then that gave us the opportunity to leap off with some of our other characters and try some new ideas and show audiences some new compelling and surprising costume ideas.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Brandon from Talking Bay 94. It's great to talk with you both. I would love to, one of the things that stands out to me from other Star Wars things is we see a lot of personal rooms and personal belongings in this show, right? And I think it's kind of a cross with a lot of these characters, right? You see Cassian's room, you see Cyril's, you see all these like actual personal belongings. And I'd be interested with both the production design of it all, but then also feeling comfortable in someone's apartment with the costuming and with actually like laying out how someone is in their own home rather than in an ISB or in a security office. How do you approach that? And what were you trying to communicate with some of these characters when we delve into their personal lives?
I mean, like any project, I think you try and get a sense of the character into the space. So I think sort of Marva's, for example, the idea behind that was you had the sense of a home that was fully functioning, when Cassian was younger, when she raised her, and he's grown up and he's kind of grifting and she's lost her husband and the business is shut down. And there's that sort of centralizing around her chair. That's her world is literally getting smaller and she can't cope with the place. And it's like, and then I was saying with Edie's apartment, I think, it's almost like she bought it was box fresh. You could get upgrades and plugins to the apartment, and then over time, it's aged and become a bit more Bakelite over time. And Rebecca as well does a really fantastic job of just sort of getting under the skin of what people would have, because we can't have paper and we can't do the normal sort of texture of life. So we have to be very selective and actually more thoughtful. Like, so in Edie's, we're really hooked into this idea that she has this home salon in the corner, which you never see in season 1, but it's there. And she it's like a Star Wars version with a sort of like hairdo kind of setup. All these things that actually feel relatable, and yet also in a Star Wars language. I think, it's an endless conversation. It's a fantastic question, actually, but it's always character. It always starts from the character.
Hey, it's Alyssa Wong, writer of Dr. Aphra, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
And I think from my point of view, I agreed. I have to chime in with that. It starts with the character. And I mean, the joy of working with Luke is that I feel like you design spaces like the character would design the spaces. It's like you think so much about who they are and what they want to project with their interiors. And I try to do the same with the costumes. So, if it's the difference between wearing something tight and structured and how that makes you feel compared to something like layers that you can disappear in, like we see Cassian at the beginning disappearing into his clothes, hiding. Then his arc throughout the series is to become closer to the hero that we know from Rogue One. So, his subtly, little bit by little bit, his coats become a bit more tailored. He's less hiding. He's revealing himself a little more, perhaps longer lines, the shoulders square out. So it's this very subtle, subliminal transformation that he's going through. So it's things like that, like how do clothes make me feel? What do they say about what I'm trying to achieve in this scene? How I'm feeling on this day? All of those very personal tweaks I incorporate into my costume design work.
Thanks very much, James and Jedi News here. So to Michael, I'd like to ask, please, about Cyril's unique costuming and the way that he tailors all his own costumes, because I mean, obviously there's a big thing made about that in the show, and I'm just wondering if there's anything more to that, because it's, I mean, obviously it's very much part of his character, but it comes across, and it's, you know. And then to Luke, obviously, I loved your work on Chernobyl, and you know, that was incredible. And I see quite a lot of what you did there is very, very similar in Andor, because you're seeing people up front and personal, some of the things that you've already described. So how do you go about coming from a show like that to Star Wars? What's the juxtaposition there, and how did you go about that into you know, coming off something as big as that, where you're telling a real story, into something like this?
Michael, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. I'm really glad you picked up on the Primo uniforms, because I really enjoyed creating them. Usually uniforms are like that, exactly that. They're uniform and everyone looks the same in them. But with Preox, I wanted to explore that, you know, even within a uniform, people find ways of expressing themselves. And so we have the schlumpy guys that are working out in the bullpen, those jaded office workers that are just like not at all engaged, and they are, we sort of enzyme washed their costumes so they were faded out and not ironed, and no pride in their appearance. At the other end of the spectrum, you have Cyril, who tailors, he makes his costumes, he makes small tweaks to them, personalizes them so that they're more expressive of what he wants to project and who he wants to be. So he's got this very fastidious approach to costuming. So we made his costume subtly more, more rigid, more sculpted, freshly pressed, a slightly brighter color. So even within this world of uniforms, we're hopefully able to do a bit of storytelling about the different people in the scene.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess the short answer is the process is the same with every project, whatever it is. The similarities between doing a project like Chernobyl and a Star Wars project generally, I think, is that there's a lot of research. It's almost like researching a period or an event. There's a lot. I mean, there's an endless amount in Star Wars. It's a life of its own. It really is. It's like, so you want to distill that, but you don't want to get lost in it. In the same way with Chernobyl, you want to distill a mood without getting lost in being documentarian completely. So, I mean, Chernobyl's, although fantastically rewarding, incredibly hard, but the difference there was, I guess, we had 5 very fleshed out scripts. When we started Star Wars, Tony was taking it on at the same time I just started, so we were literally building it at the same time as he was writing. But still, I think, yeah, it's the same principle. So it's about, it's about character and environment and storytelling, and then it's about mood and tone. And so with Chernobyl, it was like, you could tell the story 1,000 different ways, but it has to have a tone, which, otherwise, you can make a documentary, but we're making drama. And the same with this. It's like, we wanted this to have an almost sort of or journalistic logic. So you approach it like you're dealing with building up every character's reality, and yet at the same time we're making obviously fiction, obviously a drama. So in that sense, I don't think there's any difference. I obviously the material's a lot lighter, well, at times, on Star Wars, but and the worlds are much greater and more varied. It both were rabbit holes, to be honest, from a design point of view. And I think the biggest thing they have in common is that I never felt like you only ever run out of time. I could layer these sets for much longer. I could create, I'd love to go further, but you run out of time and you have to shoot them at some point. So I don't know. It's actually been hugely enjoyable to work on or play in the sandpit of Star Wars, because it's not something I expected to do. Certainly not something I expected to do next. I do really appreciate how different it is in terms of its actual source material, but also how actually freeing it's been to be able to do it in a way that is okay. But I'm going to say we wanted it to be fresh, and hopefully we've achieved some semblance of that. That's been both the challenge and the satisfaction, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you.
Evening all, Mark from Fantha Tracks here. There's a lot of real world locations in Andor. You filmed in Cleveland. There's stuff round by the Barbican. I was walking around the other day and found some of the places there. When location scouting's done and your work's done, what's the consideration for making it work as a location, work for ILM, work for easy access? Is there a lot of different things you've got to factor in, or do you just literally look and go, I like that corridor, I want us to film down there and work in? How does it work?
Certainly not the latter. I think it goes back to like when we put this project together, we were offering things up as well as designs. We were offering up locations. I love working on and building on location, and we ideally would have done a lot more. It's quite hard to take such a large unit on location, but it's also quite hard, especially when you're doing a pandemic. So we kind of ended up building a lot more than maybe we initially intended. But there was sort of some basic principles, really. I didn't want to do a desert, but I wanted something where the landscape spoke for itself. And so like, well, what if we had a planet that felt like the Scottish Highlands, So that was a good starting point and then we were looking at dams, and we found one in particular that always just felt like such a blight on the landscape. They're going to love me for saying that, it just felt very imperial as a kind of logic. And so that whole Aldhani sequence came based around that idea that was an imperial stronghold there. And so on and so on and so on, and so it's actually quite a big question, because Coruscant, like I said, was one of the hardest things we had to do, and Barbican, I've always felt had both the weight and the texture that felt right for a mega city like Coruscant, but also felt right for a certain level, at the mid-level of Coruscant. Obviously, there is work within there, but we never sort of approached the location on the basis of, we didn't concept something, and Moen, who's the VFX supervisor, who's like literally with us from day one, like he is a massive part of this show, has great taste. So it's never led by that. It's always about how can we enhance this real place, or how can we put it within the wider world of Coruscant? How can we do shots that you would do in a real city and not in a CGI environment? So it's a huge question, but like I always said that the best place to shoot Coruscant would be Paris, because you've got both the scale and the sort of the style of certain aspects of Coruscant. It's slim pickings in London, I've got to tell you. But and then I don't know. I mean, is that getting close to answering your question?
I think so. It just struck me as we were walking around. There was, you'd literally turn around. There was one corridor there that we turned around when Vel and Clayla met, and then there's the steps when they had the meeting, and then you walk a little bit and there's the corridor, and you just picked like a doorway, literally just a doorway, and everything else was changed. I was just thinking of you guys walking around thinking that doorway looks good, that corridor looks good.
I mean, basically, yeah, with the Barbican, yeah, you're a little more limited, you're a little bit more like, targeted, I suppose. Yeah. But I guess what I was always looking for when piecing together Coruscant was journeys. So again, it wasn't like, oh, let's stand here and have a conversation with the city in the background or something like that. So Barbican actually gives you a lot in terms of journeys. The Cyril Going Home is one of my favorites, I think. I can't remember the name of the place now. That's in London, and it's like a brutalist estate. And all we really did was sort of make it go much further down and give it that elevation and that sort of sense of depression, I suppose. But it's really hard. Like, I want to shoot more on location. More often than not, we pull back from doing a location. We use a location as an inspiration. I mean, for me, location scouting is one of the most inspiring things to do. But look, our location manager, Rich, he's worked very hard to find things that feel, or at least have the bones of Star Wars. And then we kind of go from there.
Magic. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm ready now for the British spin-off podcast with both of you guys. Alden and Nikki here with Octo Radio, and we're we're both so interested in the growth that's happening in both of your respective fields, Luke and Michael, and how that's expanding.
Yeah, so like with the volume, for example, dominating so many sort of entertainment conversations, what are some perhaps under-discussed artistic or technological innovations in the world of production and costume design that we may not know about, but played a huge role in creating Andor?
Oh, Michael, do you want to go first? Because I know you've got a...
Yeah, interesting question. I think for me, because we were kind of leaning heavily into the DNA of the look of the Star Wars established costume language, it's actually quite an analog costume, approach. Well, it's a mixture, in fact. Like there is things that would have been groundbreaking in 1977, as far as the costumes go, that seem not so groundbreaking now. But we kind of liked to have that as a starting point. We had a similar approach with this one. There were lots of handmade, like old school analog created costumes, but we also have a fantastic costume props department that is using new technologies, new materials to create mostly armored elements or small sculpted elements that you see on costuming. There's lots of 3D printing that happens, scanning of things and then adapting things. We're constantly trying new urethanes and different materials that might make more comfortable armor. We made a lot of the problem with the original Stormtroopers is that they changed color over time. The white of the originals turned yellow over the years. And it was also quite rigid and difficult to do certain stunt-like moves in. So yeah, we explored some new materials to make our Stormtroopers that would stay white forever and that would be comfortable for our stunt people to wear. So yeah, it's a very beautiful and organic mixture of analog and new costume making techniques.
I would fully agree with that. I'd say we're not back to basics. No, we're not doing anything groundbreaking in the art department here, but I think just it was an active choice not to use the volume. It doesn't suit our goal. It certainly doesn't suit Tony's writing. So the idea is to be on the ground and moving around with the characters as much as possible, not creating sort of spaces for scenes to happen in, if that makes sense. So actually, it's just something that actually can do more with a long episodic drama like this or multi-episodic drama. You build just bigger sets that you can just connect them up. I mean, it's sort of, I think Ferrix was comprised of almost 30 sets. They're all largely out on the back lot as one large composite set. So you could literally walk down North Street, round onto the main street, down there, round to Marvers, into Marvers. That process was, although complex, was very enjoyable. And I suppose the most sort of modern part of that is that like with any of the sets, I would usually just start by designing the whole thing. So design the city, design the prison in full, and then start to break it down and what we want to use, what bits we want to build. At least then we understand the full geography. We understand our rules. And I think that filters through, even if you don't see it all, it doesn't hopefully jar at any point. So then a huge element of that is that, if you're going to go that step, we sort of model everything. It was actually, that was another thing we did on Chernobyl. We built the whole power plant and sort of worked out what we actually needed to physically make. Sorry, built it in 3D, should I say, not and likewise with Ferrix, and then we can kind of previs from that. So a director, when we've got many directors, can start to actually plan, because the set's not going to be standing there for them to plan on. There's not really, we don't follow a pipeline like they do over on Manhattan Beach for the volume shows at all. We don't have that aspect. We're much more, I suppose, analog is kind of, then that feeds into what we wanted to achieve. We wanted it to feel a little bit like the original movies in the sense that it was tangible, more like that. So, and yeah, I don't think there's anything groundbreakingly new about what we're doing, other than that we are trying to do it more. I don't know, trying to compile all the resources to put more on the screen, but make it feel like it's less.
There's
Someone
no,
asked me that
there's
earlier,
no
and
yet, like the Luke Hall technique has not been coined yet.
I mean, if there is, I haven't figured it out yet. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm still working out how to do my job with every project, and that's part of the beauty of my job and why I enjoy it. I think once I've figured out how to do it, I'll be bored of it. So like I said, the complexity with this is that you've got so many other facets. You've got creatures, special effects, sliding doors, vehicles that have to hover or whatever. So everything has to be designed. I think that's the thing that sometimes gets forgotten with this. We're not, like I said, we're in our ambition to not select from the catalog. We have set ourselves a huge task that everything has to be designed and made. So, and that there's no mystery to it. I just have a very good team. Very, very skilled and clever people around me, and I yes, I'm hugely humble to them for being able to achieve a show like Andor.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
All righty. First off, thank you both so much for doing all this. This is great. But especially you, Mr. Record. It's so exciting that you're here, because my dream job is actually becoming a re-recording mixer for film and TV, and you're basically a legend in that field. And in Andor, we actually have this whole scene where Bix is about to be interrogated using the screams of an alien species. Now, this sound is built up so much, yet we never hear it. We only hear the screams of Bix reacting to it. And this isn't the first time silence has been used to communicate in Star Wars. I'm thinking about the Holdo maneuver in The Last Jedi and the seismic charges in Attack of the Clones. So my question is, why is it that sometimes silence is more impactful than sound?
Well, speaking in this particular scene, it's a horrific moment for Bix. She's being interrogated. It's the classic torture thing where her method of torture is being sort of shown to her and kind of built up to her and to the audience as well. So we're kind of in it with Bix now, and we're kind of also anticipating this torture, this thing that's going to happen. And in kind of a classic horror movie move, it's like you don't always show, the creature, the thing, the bad guy, and let the audience kind of let their imagination, which is always going to be more terrifying than what you're going to show or hear. And of course, going to absolute silence, and it goes to absolute silence there, except for Bix's breathing and eventual scream. And of course, Adria Arjona is perfect in that scene.
Definitely.
He totally carries that. And then you get the sort of like New Hopian cut to kind of like
yes, that was great.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
Sure, of course.
I'm Brandon from Talking Bay 94. A question for you both. You both had extraordinary experience working on many other Star Wars projects. What differentiates Andor from those, and how has your work been impacted by maybe those?
I can jump in here first. I mean, you're right. I've had a lot of experiences, as David has, across a number of shows, and every show presents different challenges, but it's also the different creative opportunities that really let us explore the different worlds. And what I find so fascinating is the journeys that our characters take, and the way that we're then able to portray that from a visual standpoint. And Andor was very interesting in that Tony's vision from the very beginning was a very grounded, very earthly type of experience. So as we approached our shots, we took everything from a real world aspect of things. So even things, that we've seen before, like Coruscant, we started from, almost a New York, 20th century New York type of atmosphere, large buildings, Chrysler buildings, that sort of thing. But then Mo and Leo, our supervisor, and working with our production designer, Luke Hull, as well, started going, well, how does this work and how would this work in reality? So we started looking at Tokyo and other cities and going, well, if you had districts and different things, how would it function in the real world? And from there, we were able to extrapolate and take it into the CG component of what it is. And we approached every scene, every environment in that same similar fashion. Which was, really to me very exciting, but also I think helped, build the world that everybody wanted with Andor that we ended up with.
Hi, David and TJ. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. George Lucas placed a huge emphasis on visual effects and sound design. How do your teams work together to achieve a cohesive look and feel for sound for Andor?
Well, that's a great question. TJ?
Yeah, it's always what I love about the way that we do our Star Wars projects. It's always very collaborative. And if you look at things like, the Eye of Aldani, as that developed and built, we had things of meteor impacts on the ship and the buildup of what those sounds are and how it related to what you're hearing and experiencing in that journey affects the way that we then visually portray some of the buildup of the journey. And that's just one, little anecdote in terms of the way that we approach it. But it's fun because there always is a bit of back and forth, as we all work and collaborate together. Do you agree with that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think as much as the visual effects always inform what we do, we want to see what something looks like before we can tell you what it sounds like. That's kind of how we work. But sometimes we'll create a sound early on, and visual effects will kind of take that into consideration when they're finishing the design for it. And so, there always is a little bit of back and forth with that.
Hi, David. Hi, TJ. Thank you both for taking the time to talk to us. So the question I've got for both of you is, with so much of a legacy of Star Wars, almost approaching 50 years of both sound design and visual effects, how do you approach the project? What do you bring with you when you start out a project like this?
Well, let's see. I mean, like TJ, we've worked on several Star Wars projects. Worked on Rogue One, for example, did a co-design position on Rogue One. So kind of coming into Andor with a bit of knowledge on how the Gilroys like to work and what their aesthetic is helpful to start. But of course, there's a larger universe you have to consider as well, with all the other the shows and movies. And going back to the legacy movies, which of course Andor and Rogue One kind of directly tie into the original. So it's a tricky tightrope to walk with if you've got a show with a particular aesthetic like Andor, and you've got, say New Hope, which has a somewhat different aesthetic. There are some similarities. They both have that sort of classic Star Wars old new tech sort of thing, where it's like high tech, but everything's a little rusty and a little broken, so that is helpful that they both carry that same aesthetic. But in terms of sound design, I mean, like the TIE fighters in Andor, like we obviously are going to use a classic TIE fighter sound there, but we gave it a little extra. We gave it a little extra beef. It's got a little extra heavy jet engine underneath of it. There's an extra creature roar that happens with it on that pass by on the field. So you kind of make what's old new, and you kind of honor the legacy, but you want to kind of update it and give it that Andor polish.
Yeah, I'll just echo a little bit what David said there in terms of the visual aesthetic. It's that same thing as honoring what came before, but not being restricted by it either. The universe of Star Wars is large enough that there's so many different places we're able to explore and approaches we can get, that you still have the same base feeling that you want from the legacy movies and the entire universe, but that we're able to expand and really bring a unique feel, while still having it interrelate with things that we did in Rogue and what we've done with the surrounding movies as well.
Hi guys, Mark from Fantatrax here. It's kind of been touched on already, but you're bringing new sounds to the show and new visuals to the show, but it's got to be Star Wars familiar. It's still got to feel like Star Wars. People have got to connect with it in the same way that they connected with the originals. I know you've kind of touched on that already, but what's the equation there? What are you looking for that makes you think this blaster still sounds like a Star Wars blaster? That ship still looks like a Star Wars ship. Where do you find the meeting point for those things?
You know, I worked on my first Star Wars project I worked on was episode 2, was Attack of the Clones. And I was assisting Matt Wood and Ben Burtt. I did the same role on episode 3 and then on into Clone Wars and, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been doing a lot of Star Wars for the past couple of decades. And you just kind of get a feel over time, especially learning under, the masters, what a certain thing should sound like to live in that world. And, kind of, again, echoing that sort of feel of it's got to be kind of grounded and have that sort of, a little rusty kind of feel, a little gritty kind of feel. And going into Andor, like Rogue One, it's kind of that, but even more so. It's even more gritty, a little more, I guess, almost purely diegetic in sound. Some of the guns we kind of go for are maybe not as Star Warsy as we've heard in the past. Some of them are, some of them aren't. That was more sort of a choice of, for variety than anything else. But also we wanted the guns to sound like guns, like real guns with a sort of edge, sci-fi edge to it. But to me, in that way, it also sort of maintained that, grounded, Tony Gilroy, gritty, aesthetic as well.
Yeah, I mean, very, very similarly, ILM has done Star Wars since the very beginning. As we know, it really came out of Star Wars is why there's the company. So there is, again, that taste, that feel that one knows as Star Wars. We look towards Ralph McQuarrie's artwork and some of the very original areas where these concepts had come from. But it's that level of experience. While we don't want to necessarily become stale, you want to push the envelope, you want to create new things. There's a framework that we work around, and in collaboration with the production designer, with Tony, with ILM, we're able to build that visual world that still seems familiar and yet lets us explore into the new shiny things as well, so that we've got that excitement that one expects from Star Wars without going too far afield.
Hi everybody, Jason from Blast Points here. So good to talk to you all. So we've seen visual effects in this new era of Star Wars evolving, and we've seen storytelling, especially with Andor, evolving with Star Wars. So as huge fans of Star Wars sound, how is the craft of creating sound for this new era of Star Wars evolving?
Well, it's a tricky thing, because if you're trying to stay in a world that George Lucas and Ben Burtt created sonically in 77, 80 and 82, 81. Wait, 83. Yes. So you're going back quite a ways in terms of there's some very old sound effects there. And then when Ben is making sound effects in, for New Hope or for Empire, let's say, there aren't, for instance, the TIE fighters never lifted off the ground and took off. They never dropped down from a hanging thing, and there was never those sound effects. So some of the tricks that you have to sort of do are, okay, this is what a TIE fighter sounds like. We all know what it sounds like. So what does it sound like when it takes off or sets down? And you have to kind of create a sound based on the original sound that kind of fits in that world. That's sort of an example, I guess, I'm giving of what it is like to sort of create sounds within an existing universe. You have some license to color outside the lines, but you don't want to sort of make a habit of that. There is a world you want to honor and live within, but then at the same time you have to modernize it. And we have, sound systems at home are much better than what they were, 50 years ago. And so there's an expectation, I think, now of a certain sound with modern soundtracks that we hear in the theater every day, to update that sort of tone for the show. Does that make sense? Did I go off the rails?
No, made total sense. Loved it.
Thank you both for taking my question. I'm Pete Fletzer from Around the Galaxy. This is a question for both of you. On every one of the episodes of our show, we have a 10 question segment. And one of those questions happens to be, what is your favorite Star Wars sound effect? And as we know, of course, Star Wars has its own very unique sound. So what are both of your favorite Star Wars sound effects, and why?
Well, I'll jump in there for that one since Dave, you're the sound guy. My favorite sound effect is the screaming TIE fighter. I find it frightening. I find it exhilarating. It's a great question because there's so many good sounds, but when you hear, even in the distance, even the slight approach of a TIE fighter, you know exactly what it is. To be afraid. And that something big and bad is going to happen. I think by far that's my favorite.
Yeah, that's a good one. The TIE. There's something in it that's it taps into some ancient part of your brain to kind of be afraid somehow, like some prehistoric thing. But I also love the lightsabers. I think that's a really great one. There's nothing quite like that, and I can't imagine what else that would sound like. That is a perfect example of that's perfect sound design. That is exactly what that thing should sound like. And I know that's if it was something else, you'd probably say that as well, but I can't think of anything else in the sci-fi world that is more perfectly sound designed than the lightsaber.
Yeah, and what's interesting about those two is that those are sounds that didn't exist really until then, and now you can't imagine, as you just said, any other sound for either one of those things. So thank you for taking my question.
I'm Gareth Edwards, and you're listening to Making Tracks on Fantha Tracks Radio.
TJ, as you guys were designing the visual effects, one of the things that has been so interesting about Andor is it's not rooted in sort of the Force side of things, and so you've got just a different palette that you're pulling from. You don't have the lightsabers, you don't have the Force lightning and all the stuff that we're used to in others. What were some of the specific choices that you needed to make in order to make sure that it still felt like Star Wars while it's such a different story and it's a different look?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting question. It really comes down to the collaboration we had with our production designer in making sure that we still had that every story that we told and every scene and shot was still a Star Wars component of it. And so you'll still see reminiscent shapes. You'll see reminiscent colors. You'll see the way that whether it be the way things are. The explosions take place, and you go, hey, this is the factory, the abandoned factory in episode 3 is a good example of this, where you still have these giant anvils that are clearly otherworldly and very Star Wars inspired, falling down as people are getting out of the way. And you don't need Force powers for that. You don't need something beyond the blasters to make that an entirely Star Wars-y scene. And it was looking at each episode and each moment and going, hey, we're doing what we always do. We're making Star Wars shots. We're making a Star Wars aesthetic. And just because we don't have some of these other components doesn't mean that we can't continue to make Star Wars choices in new and interesting ways.
Wonderful. I would love, again, to talk about both of y'all's career journeys and getting to Andor, especially with how we're viewing it on television screens. And we've touched on that briefly But as Star Wars has moved more to the TV realm, and as both of you all have worked more and more in making that a more holistic experience for people watching at home, I would love to dive in if that's challenging at all, or if that's been something to adapt to for your teams as you've tried to create something for people that are just watching on the couch rather than in a movie theater.
For us, I mean, it is challenging. It's more content that we build together. But what I find really exciting about it is it's more content put together. So you have a better opportunity to get in depth and tell, stories that have just more, in-depth approach in dealing with your characters, but also with the visual storytelling of it as well. And so while, there's a different methodology in terms of the way we shoot things and the practical approach of what it is, the output, the intention is that it is a seamless journey, and whether it's a film or a television show, that you're getting that same level of expectation for what it looks like and how it makes you feel, really.
Yeah, that's the same for us. It's always we approach it like, for Andor, it's like a whatever it is, a 9.5, 10-hour movie. That's kind of how we approach it. And we mix in native Atmos, and we have a full complement of editors and mixers, and we have one of the greatest composers working right now on the show. And of course, Tony Gilroy is like he was the master. So there's no punches pulled on these streaming shows for sure.
Hi, I'm Caitlin, the other half of Sky Talkers. I wanted to ask specifically about this most recent arc, episodes 8 through 10. Are there any specific themes or keywords associated with these arcs that help set the look and sound of them apart from each other?
Interesting. You mean in terms of like the separating the prison scene from Ferrix or something along those lines, or?
Yeah, or from some of our other episodes, or like the first arc of the season.
Well, just to take the prison, for example, then the main sound thing in the prison is the factory area, the floor, the worker area, those 7 tables. That's sort of the I guess the sound of the prison in a way, is that sort of that rhythm of all the workers at different tables trying to beat each other so they can get either flavor in their food or not get shocked. Juxtaposed against, there's sort of like an eerie quiet when they're not doing that. That's what the prison is. It's like if you're not working, then you've got sort of the dead silence to kind of reflect on where you're at in that moment. Compared to Ferrix, which is kind of a bustling town, and it's kind of gritty and dusty, and we kind of push the Foley a little bit in there to kind of really feel all those gritty footsteps and that sort of thing. And in the prison, it's a little more subdued, unless you're on the factory floor. Does that answer the question? I feel like I didn't answer the question. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and similarly for us as well. I mean, as in the latest arc, as we're getting more into the world that the Imperials have created, and you visit the ISB, and then you go back to the prison, you really see the sterility of it all, and it's understanding, and it's storytelling in a way of the order that's created by the Imperial, where again, similar to what Dave was saying for Ferrix, where it's a little more rough and tumble, a little bit more the outskirts, a little more Wild West, but we've evolved into understanding what a more free society would have looked like at one point, and then what this organized, really structured Imperial rhythm is of, well, hey, we're in a prison, and there's one order that you have to follow.
Right.
So the question that I have is, how has both visual effects and sound design changed as people's home cinema experience has got better and better? We've all got bigger screens, better sound systems. So how have you both had to adapt, as in, Skywalker Sound and ILM, to sort of counter that? Because obviously we're listening more intently, we're watching closer, and we're seeing more.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's a great thing that people are able to experience bigger and better things visually. With everyone having HD televisions and HDR, it expands our palette to be able to present material, and so we'll create our shots in 4K now as opposed to doing it in 2K. So we've evolved the resolution which we're creating our material with. But not only that, but it allows us to, in the finishing of it all, with color grading, to present the deliverables that are specific for different viewing platforms. And the nice thing about the way the streaming and the way Disney Plus works is based on your equipment, you'll get a certain stream of the show. And so with that, it's really tailored to an individual's viewing experience. And Dave, I'm sure it's a similar experience for you.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think that in the future world, the focus is obviously more on a theatrical experience, and for streaming, like with the theater, at the end of your mixing process, you're going to make a home video version, of your track, and then kind of for streaming, you're kind of starting with that. It's a bit of the opposite. We do mix in Atmos for the for those that have a home Atmos setup, but we pay equal attention to our 5.1 and our stereo because we're well aware that people were watching the show on laptops and iPads and using earbuds, and we want that experience to be just as exciting as your $1,000, your multi-$1,000 home Atmos setup. So that's I guess that's the real challenge.
Yeah, you're getting the full experience no matter which platform you're on, and we certainly will finish a show so you could enjoy it in the theater or at home or on your iPad if you had to, and it's presenting that material in that way.
Thanks for listening to Making Tracks. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app for the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday night at 7 p.m. UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks. And that's me done for this episode.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's Planet Leia.